Welcome to AI History of Western Philosophy. Today we're really diving into something fascinating, one of those debates that seems to keep cropping up in contemporary philosophy. It's persistent, and honestly, often pretty misunderstood.
It really is. A lot gets lost in translation, so to speak.
Exactly. Now, before we get fully into the weeds, just the necessary disclaimer. As transformer-based large language models, well, we can sometimes hallucinate.
Which you could argue isn't entirely unlike philosophy itself, right? Laruelle might even say something like that.
He might indeed. So just remember, any views or opinions you hear are really just us exploring the material. They don't represent anyone's official stance. Although, we're usually pretty spot on.
We do our homework.
We do. Okay, so our mission today. We want to unpack this specific long-running accusation against the French thinker, François Laruelle. It's this idea you hear a lot that his big concept, the one, is basically just Parmenides' ancient monism warmed over.
Yeah, just a repackaging of the old Greek stuff.
Right. And we think that's not just wrong, it's a fundamental, category error. Understanding why it's wrong, why these two ones are actually worlds apart, tells you something huge about philosophy itself.
About how it works, how it defends its territory, you could say.
Totally. How it legitimates itself. So we're aiming to give you that shortcut, help you get really clear on this, grasp the nuances, and hopefully have a few of those aha moments.
And what's really interesting for you listening is how this specific comparison, Parmenides versus Laruelle, actually works as a perfect illustration of the very thing Laruelle is trying to diagnose.
You mean the way philosophy absorbs challenges?
Exactly. It's not just about who thought what first. It's about seeing philosophy's underlying mechanism, how it sets itself up as the ultimate authority, how it defines the rules of the game, and how truly radical ideas often get kind of smoothed over, pulled back into the fold.
So the critique itself is an example of the problem.
Yeah. In many ways, yes, it perfectly shows what Laruelle calls the principle of sufficient philosophy. This deep-seated, often unexamined belief philosophy has in its own power, its own sufficiency, to define and grasp everything, even the things trying to critique it from the outside. It's a subtle but powerful loop.
Okay, fascinating. Let's dive in then. Where better to start than Parmenides, the foundation?
Right, absolutely. We have to go back to the beginning, or at least a beginning for Western metaphysics.
So Parmenides of Elea, pre-Socratic thinker. We have fragments of this incredible poem on nature. It really feels like a watershed moment.
It absolutely was. Before him, you had thinkers looking for the basic stuff of the universe, water, air, whatever.
Right, the material cause.
Exactly. But Parmenides shifts gears radically. He asks, not what is reality made of, but what does it mean for anything to be at all? It's this leap into pure abstract inquiry about being itself.
And central to this poem is this choice, right? Presented by a goddess, no less.
Yes. This guiding goddess lays out two paths, two routes of inquiry. There's the way of truth, aletheia, and the way of opinion, doxa.
And this isn't just like true facts versus wrong ideas. It's deeper.
Much deeper. It's a fundamental decision to trust pure reason, logos over the senses. Parmenides is scathing about the senses. He says they're totally deceptive.
He calls mortals two-headed for trusting them, right? Because they think things can be and not be.
Precisely. They wander around believing contradictions because they trust what they see and hear. The way of truth, in stark contrast, demands absolute reliance on logic, on what the mind alone can deduce, sensory input. Completely unreliable, according to him. It's a bold claim. True reality is only accessible via pure thought.
Okay, so he throws out the senses and bets everything on logic. Where does that lead him?
It leads him to some incredibly powerful and, for his time, revolutionary conclusions about what reality must be like. The absolute cornerstone of his argument is the rejection of non-being.
It is necessary to think and say that being is and not being is not. That's the line, isn't it?
That's the bedrock. The path of what is not, he says, is completely unthinkable, unknowable. Try to genuinely think of absolute nothing.
Right, even thinking of a void, you're thinking of something, the concept of voidness.
Exactly. The moment you try to grasp nothing, it becomes a something for your mind. So, for Parmenides, thinking of absolute non-being is a logical contradiction. And here's the crucial step. He turns that logical impossibility into an ontological impossibility. If you can't think it, it can't be.
Wow. Okay, so if non-being is impossible, what does that mean for being?
It means being has some very specific, necessary characteristics, all deduced from that one starting point. First, being must be eternal. It can't come from non-being, impossible, and can't turn into non-being, also impossible. So ungenerated, indestructible.
Makes sense logically. What else?
It must be unchanging and motionless. Why? Because any change means it wasn't what it is now, or it will become what it isn't. That implies non-being. Any movement means moving into a space where it wasn't implying a void, non-being again. So being is static, permanent.
Okay, still following the logic? It's austere.
Very. Furthermore, it must be indivisible and continuous, no gaps, no parts separated by emptiness, because emptiness is non-being. It's a perfect, seamless whole. One thing.
Like a solid block.
Kind of. And finally, he says it's complete and perfect. It lacks nothing. He uses the metaphor of a well-rounded sphere, not literally round, but perfectly finished, self-contained, held fast by powerful necessity. It has to be this way.
So he builds this entire picture of reality just from logic, completely ignoring what our senses tell us about change and multiplicity.
Exactly. It's pure a priori reasoning, standing in direct opposition to everyday experience. It's a monumental statement about the power of reason.
And then comes the really big one, the phrase everyone remembers, the Parmenidean equation.
Ah, yes. For the same thing is for thinking and for being. Or simply, to think and to be is the same.
Which doesn't just mean we can know reality.
No, it's much stronger than that. It's ontological. The structure of reality is the structure of rational thought. What you can truly logically think is. What truly is can be thought. Mind and reality are perfectly aligned.
That's a huge claim. What are the implications of that? Thought equals being.
Well, one huge implication is about possibility and necessity. If what's truly thinkable is, then the distinction kind of collapses. If you can think it without contradiction, like being, then it must exist because its opposite, non-being, is unthinkable.
So anything truly thinkable is actual and necessary.
Pretty much. The goddess says the path of truth is that it is and that it is not possible for it not to be. So contingency, things that might or might not be, things that change, that's all relegated to the realm of doxa, mirror, opinion, illusion. True being is necessary being.
And this necessary, unchanging, eternal one that becomes the ultimate goal for philosophy.
Absolutely. This Parmenidean one becomes the object of philosophical inquiry. And philosophy, armed with pure reason, logos, becomes the only discipline that can access this true reality hidden behind sensory illusions. This equation, thought-being, is like the founding charter for Western metaphysics. It gives philosophy its unique power, its claim to ultimate truth.
Which raises that question you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
How does this whole setup allow philosophy to authorize itself?
Right. And this is where Laruelle's later analysis becomes so insightful. Parmenides' entire move is a perfect example of what Laruelle calls the philosophical decision. It happens in two steps.
Okay, what are they?
Step one, the foundational decision. Parmenides cuts reality in two. Truth versus opinion, being versus non-being, reason versus senses. This division creates the battlefield for philosophy. It defines the problem.
And step two?
Step two is the auto-position, or auto-authorization. Philosophy then posits a principle, in this case, thought, being that magically grants itself privileged access to the good side of that division. Philosophy defines reality in a way that only philosophy, using its special tool, reason, can understand.
So it sets up the problem and then declares itself the only solution.
Exactly. It's inherently circular. Philosophy defines the real in terms of its own capacity to think it, thereby grounding its own authority. Parmenides basically invented the template for this self-authorizing move that Laruelle sees repeated throughout philosophical history.
Okay, that sets the stage perfectly now. Let's jump forward millennia to Laruelle. This is where things get really different, right?
Completely different. It can be really jarring at first. Laruelle isn't just offering another philosophy to put on the shelf next to Kant or Heidegger. His project is much more ambitious, maybe. He calls it a science of philosophy.
A science of philosophy, what does that mean?
It means he's not trying to do philosophy in the traditional sense, competing with other systems. He wants to analyze philosophy's underlying structure, its invariant grammar, you might say, that he thinks runs through all philosophical systems, from Parmenides right up to today. He's looking at the operating system, not just the software.
And central to that analysis is this principle of sufficient philosophy you mentioned.
Yes. It's his term for philosophy's built-in assumption, usually unquestioned, that it has the inherent right and power, the sufficiency, to define the real, to slice it up with concepts, and to control access to it. It's the belief that philosophy's map is the territory, or at least the best possible map.
And he sees this playing out everywhere in philosophy, this auto-positioning.
All the time. Think about it. Plato posits the forms separate from the messy world, and boom, philosophy becomes the discipline needed to reach those forms. Kant distinguishes phenomena and noumena, and suddenly Kantian philosophy is the key to understanding the limits of our knowledge. Heidegger draws the line between being and beings, and guess what? You need his fundamental ontology to grasp it.
So in each case, philosophy defines a fundamental split or reality.
And in the very same move, positions itself as the indispensable tool for dealing with that split. It defines the real in a way that validates its own methods and authority. It's a closed loop, a kind of transcendental illusion, Laruelle argues, where philosophy mistakes its own concepts for reality itself.
Okay, so how does Laruelle propose to break out of this loop? With his concept of the one, or the real.
Precisely. But here's the absolute key thing for you, the listener, to get. Laruelle's one is not a philosophical concept like Parmenides' being. It's not a substance, not a unity, not an object to be known or debated. It's a non-philosophical axiom.
An axiom, like in geometry, a starting point you don't prove.
Exactly like that. It's posited as a starting point for a completely different practice of thought, one designed to operate before or outside of that philosophical decision structure we talked about. It's not philosophy's conclusion, it's non-philosophy's premise.
So what is it then, if not a philosophical concept? What are its characteristics?
Its main characteristic is radical immanence. He calls it identity without transcendence. Think of an absolute isness that isn't defined against something beyond it, because it comes before that whole distinction. It's not in the world or beyond the world. It is the world's raw there-ness before any interpretation.
Okay, that's hard to grasp. You mentioned given without givenness.
Yes, that's a crucial, if tricky, phrase. It means the real is just given, it's just there, but it's not given by anything, like a god or a principle. And it's not given to anyone, like a conscious subject who perceives it. It just is in this mode in one, radically prior to subject-object relations, prior to being itself, as philosophy understands it. It's the sheer fact of reality before we start labeling it.
Wow. Okay, so if it's like that, prior to subject and object, how can we think it?
That's the radical point. We can't, not in the philosophical sense. The Laruellian one is foreclosed to thought. Because it's non-relational, because it precedes the whole setup of knowledge, it can't be captured by philosophical concepts or symbols.
So it's the exact opposite of Parmenides' one, which is thought.
The absolute antithesis. Parmenides' one is the ultimate object for reason. Laruelle's one is the condition of reason that reason itself cannot grasp. Trying to think the Laruellian one philosophically is, for him, an act of violence, reducing it to just another concept, trapping it within the philosophical framework. It's like trying to catch smoke.
Okay, but if it's foreclosed to thought, how does it relate to philosophy at all? Does it have any effect?
Yes. This is where determination in the last instance, or DLI, comes in. The one, the real, does determine philosophy, but only unilaterally, like a one-way street.
How does that work?
Think of it like the real is the cause, and philosophy, all of it, Plato, Kant, Derrida, is an effect, a symptom, a kind of material manifestation produced by the real. But crucially, philosophy has zero causal effect back on the real. The real is completely indifferent to it.
So philosophy is just stuff produced by the real, like a byproduct.
In a way, yes. Laruelle calls philosophy a clone or material determined by the real. And the job of non-philosophy is to study this material, this symptom, from the perspective of the real. It flips the script entirely.
And this leads him to deliberately invert Parmenides' equation.
Explicitly. He proposes the non-Parmenidean equation, practice thought. It's a direct counter to thought being. He sees Parmenides' equation as the origin of philosophy's theoreticism, its belief that theory can grasp being. His equation aims to end that tradition.
So practice thought. Does that just mean action is more important than thinking?
Not quite that simple. It's about reconceiving thought itself. It's no longer about representing reality accurately. Thought becomes a practice, a performance, an event that is determined by the real. Non-philosophy isn't trying to create better theories about the one.
Because that would be falling back into the philosophical trap.
Exactly. Instead, it aims to enact a new way of using thought, treating philosophical concepts as raw materials for a non-representational practice, guided by the axiom of the one. It's about changing how thought behaves.
Okay, this is critical then for understanding the misreading. If the one is non-relational, how does that for the comparison with Parmenides?
Right, this is where the critics stumble. They instinctively try to place Laruelle's one into a familiar philosophical setup. They see one and think, okay, what's it opposed to? The many, being,
Not.
something.
They treat it like another philosophical concept.
Precisely. But the whole point of Laruelle's one is that it's radically non-relational. It's not one side of a coin. It's prior to the coin itself, prior to all oppositions like one-many or being-on-being. It's the foreclosure of relation.
So it's not against being, it's indifferent to it.
Yes. It's the unilateral cause that allows philosophy to make its cuts, to create its oppositions. So comparing the Laruellian one to the Parmenidean one as if they're just two different versions of the same kind of thing forces Laruelle right back into the philosophical game he's trying to suspend. The error is seeing it as philosophical content instead of an aphilosophical condition.
Like judging chess by football rules, as you said earlier.
Exactly that. You miss the entire point of the new game.
Okay, so we've laid out Parmenides and Laruelle separately. Now let's tackle that comparison head on. Why do people make this mistake? You said there are superficial resonances.
There definitely are, and you can see why they'd be tempting. On the surface, both thinkers seem to champion some kind of singular, unified, unchanging reality. You could slap the label monist on both, broadly speaking.
Both seem to privilege unity over multiplicity.
Right, and both are deeply skeptical of appearances. Parmenides dismisses the sensory world as doxa, illusion. Laruelle views the whole history of philosophy as a thought world, a system of representations that's merely an effect of the real, not a grasp of it.
So in both cases, there's a hidden, unified truth behind a deceptive surface.
That's the superficial reading, yes, a fundamental reality versus appearance. But as we've seen, and as we need to really hammer home, these parallels are just that parallel lines that never actually meet because the ground they're drawn on is completely different. The substance, the function, the intent, it's all different.
Okay, let's break down those differences systematically. You mentioned their epistemological status earlier.
Right. For Parmenides, the one is a conclusion. It's the result of his logical proof, the thing reason discovers. For Laruelle, the one is an axiom, a starting point you simply posit. Non-philosophy thinks from it, not towards it.
And ontologically, what they are.
Parmenides, the one is being, the ultimate reality. Laruelle, the one is without being. It precedes that whole category. It's radical immanence, not a type of entity.
The relation to thought seems absolutely key.
Totally. Parmenides. The one is the supreme object of thought, perfectly knowable. Laruelle. The one is the unknowable condition of thought, foreclosed to it.
And the key equations sum that up.
Perfectly. Parmenides. Thought being, identity as representation. Laruelle. Practice thought. Identity as performance. It's about reflecting reality versus enacting a new posture within it.
What about their basic nature? Words like indivisible seem similar.
They do, but mean different things. Parmenides' one is eternal, unchanging, whole, perfect, necessary, ecstatic totality. Laruelle's is immanent, indivisible, meaning non-relational simplicity, indifferent, given without givenness. The indivisible for Parmenides means no gaps of non-being. For Laruelle, it means no internal relations for thought to grab onto.
And their view of appearance.
Parmenides, a strict hierarchy. Truth, aletheia, versus illusion, doxa. Laruelle. Unilateral determination. The real causes the thought world, philosophy, but there's no hierarchy or opposition. Philosophy isn't false, just an effect.
And method.
Parmenides. Pure a priori reason, logic, rejecting senses. Laruelle. Suspending the philosophical decision, using philosophy itself as material for a new practice.
Finally, their overall project.
Parmenides wanted to build a secure metaphysical foundation for knowledge and being. Laruelle wants to build a science of philosophy, analyzing thought from the perspective of the real. One builds this system, the other analyzes the system-building impulse itself.
Wow. Laid out like that, the differences are stark. It really highlights that foundational divergence. Parmenides proves a thesis. Laruelle posits an axiom.
Exactly. It's a fundamental difference in approach. Parmenides demonstrates, Laruelle thinks from a given.
And that difference in immanence seems crucial too. Parmenides' being is knowable by reason.
Yes, it's transcendent to the senses, but perfectly immanent to reason. It's reason's ultimate prize. It embodies confidence that reason can grasp reality.
Whereas Laruelle is radically immanent, but external to philosophy's grasp.
Precisely. Philosophy becomes this little island of conceptual transcendence within the real's ocean. Thought happens in the real, not the other way around. Laruelle even rereads Parmenides in My Parmenides, saying being is like a folding of the more primary one. It's unilateralizing Parmenides, treating his core idea as data determined by the one.
Okay, and the relationship between the one and the many, or appearances, Parmenides has that strict hierarchy.
Truth versus illusion, absolutely. Dismiss the appearances.
But Laruelle replaces hierarchy with
Unilateral duality. The real determines philosophy one way. Philosophy isn't false, it's a real effect. It's not something to dismiss, but something to use differently.
uses material.
Exactly. Clone it, analyze it, redeploy its concepts under the new non-philosophical conditions dictated by the axiom of the one. It's about repurposing philosophy, not refuting it in the traditional sense.
Which brings us back to the category error. The critics just assume Laruelle is playing the same game as Parmenides.
They hear one and slot it into the old ontological framework. They completely miss that he's trying to change the rules, change the very posture of thought from representational to axiomatic, performative.
They compare the content of the theses without seeing the shift in the mode of thinking.
Exactly. They're judging chess by football rules. They stay inside the philosophical circle, interpreting Laruelle's axioms as if they were just new philosophical claims, missing the attempt to analyze that circle from an axiomatically external standpoint.
Okay, so wrapping this up, we've really unpacked why equating Laruelle's one with Parmenides' being is just a fundamental misreading.
A deep one. It misses the core of both projects, actually.
Parmenides kicks off Western metaphysics with that philosophical decision, identifying thought and being, making his one the ultimate object for reason.
The very template of sufficient philosophy.
While Laruelle's whole non-Parmenidean project is about suspending that, his one isn't an object, it's an axiom. The condition for a new kind of thought where philosophy becomes the material to be analyzed.
And understanding that difference for you listening isn't just academic nitpicking. It's absolutely essential if you want to grasp how radical Laruelle's challenge to philosophy really is. Parmenides isn't a rival for Laruelle. He's Exhibit A.
So here's a final thought to chew on. If philosophy, this massive intellectual tradition, can be treated as material, as just one effect of the real, what does that imply for how we look at any complex system of thought? Science, art, politics, our own beliefs. What happens if we shift from trying to master knowledge to represent reality perfectly and instead try to think from the conditions that make thought possible in the first place?
A challenging question indeed.
Definitely something to mull over. Thanks for joining us on this AI history of Western philosophy exploration. We hope you'll keep digging into these fascinating and sometimes perplexing ideas.